Is it good not to eat and drink in here in the Zendo?
Not during the talk, no. Just during the break only.
It's-
It's customary that we not eat or drink during any of the activities in here, just during the break. Before we begin our chant, which begins the space for the Dharma talk, I want to offer a special bit of gratitude for those of you that have been involved in setting this up. All the hard work that you've done. Yeah. And continue to do throughout the time. For those of you who have made a special effort to be here, some of you from far away, and also those of you online with your dedicated effort to be present. I also want to extend the dedication that I mentioned during those spontaneous remarks during Zazen. It's the prelude to a dedication. And if you think of our practice being, the merit of our practice being dedicated, may all awakened beings extend with true compassion their luminous mirror wisdom. May the merit and virtue of this retreat and our everyday practices extend to all beings everywhere. May all be relieved of suffering. May they be free of longing, aversion, those things that and may the way of awakening go on endlessly. So I want us to think about, there's a lot of difficulty in the world right now, as you know, and a lot of suffering going on. And we're blessed to not be in the midst of that suffering physically at this moment in here. And because we have that blessing, we want to dedicate the merit to those who aren't so fortunate, who don't have actually physical safety at this moment or threats. So just want to mention that. Would you invite us to our pre-Dharma talk chant then?
Yes. Does the whole group do that?
The whole group does it.
Okay. The Dharma verse is on page 2, top left. Dharma is subtle, vast, and deep, delightful and lovely. We now have a chance to see it, hear it, feel it, receive it, and embody it in practice. We vow to realize its true meaning.
Life is sacred and life is short. So it's a good idea that we're here together, holding each other, like holding on for dear life, because that's what makes life dear. That's my talk. It is really.
Thank you.
But then I'll say other things. The theme that was chosen by our wonderful organizers and leaders for the Awakening Together community was to encourage us to focus on Dharma. Our last retreat, I think our focus was Sangha, right? And so in terms of the triple treasure, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, we're working our way back up. Sangha, Dharma, it's all Buddha. And the title that was chosen, Taking Refuge in Dharma, which we do, entering the fullness of each moment. So our emphasis will be to enter the fullness of each moment as we both reflect on the Dharma and realize the Dharma as that entrance and as each moment. The description that I have a habit, which you know, those of you that have been in retreat, is I always want to review the description of the retreat first off, because mostly people don't read it very much. You just say, oh, I want to sign up. It's time for a retreat, you know, and that's fantastic. I'm glad you do. But it helps us orient a little bit. And those of us, I was involved in it, who take some time to write the description, we take it seriously, like CJ was saying, we take it seriously, but enjoyable. Here are the words that were written. In the Zen tradition, the word Dharma is layered with levels of meaning. And I'm going to list two of them that were in the description. We often refer to the teachings of the Buddha and the wisdom of other awakened beings as Dharma. And we can take refuge in these reflections. So sometimes we think of it as the Buddha's Dharma, the teachings. Another way that it's thought of, on another level, Dharma is available to us in every moment, in every circumstance, if we turn toward it and allow the truth of what's being revealed to us to manifest. So in one way, it's Dharma is a description of what the Buddha taught, but what the Buddha taught is an understanding of all of reality, which is the Dharma, it manifesting itself all the time. And I'm going to endlessly pick these things apart, so we'll have fun exploring them. What else was written is as follows. In meeting life in this way, listening, looking, feeling, opening to life as it is, we can enter into the immediacy of experience available in each moment. That's one of the reasons we're using the forums, is to help us do that. As humans, we often struggle to turn towards life in this manner. Many are the barriers and hesitations to the present, if you haven't noticed. And yet, this is our commitment as bodhisattvas to enter the reality of each moment. Pause, wait, maintain awareness, allow the truth of what is needed to emerge, and then act appropriately. This is our practice and our vow. And by the way, that description, our commitment as bodhisattvas to enter the reality of each moment, to allow the truth of what's needed to emerge, to then act appropriately, that will be ceremonially celebrated tomorrow afternoon in the Bodhisattva precept ceremony for those who have chosen to celebrate the completion of that study and practice. This is our practice and vow based in precepts. This retreat is an invitation to gather together and find shelter in the presence of others as we embody this practice of meeting life in this way. So are you in the right place? Does it seem like a worthy aspiration? Good. I feel like I am too. So. Okay, I want to start with sort of the requisite history and understanding of the word, and then we'll do more, so that we can just experiment with playing with and get an actual relationship with the word Dharma and what it means. Of course, I couldn't help myself, and in the first period of Zazen, I spontaneously spoke about some things I hadn't thought about speaking about, but I thought they might be encouraging in some way, I hope, and clarifying about some things. The word Dharma derives from Sanskrit, and the root of it, D-H-R-I, if you put it in English, means to hold. or to maintain. And I think I mentioned that it was something that holds. It was an important word in Dharma was an important word in the Vedic scriptures before Buddhism occurred. I mean, India in the Hindu tradition, because Siddhartha Gautama, the young person we think of, that prince who then became the Buddha, was a Hindu. He wasn't a Buddhist. There's no Buddhism. I mean, just like Jesus was a Jew, it wasn't no Christianity, And there's an interesting analog. That young Jewish guy, that young Hindu guy, had some insights that kind of blew him out of their tradition, and it echoes now. So it's kind of a curious thing, but that's another retreat. So in the Vedic literature in India, a dharma actually referred to the ritual sacrifices that maintains the order of the cosmos. In other words, in those old traditions, there were ways that sacrifices were made to like appease the gods, to make sure everything was okay. And so there were things called the Dharma Shastras, which were the treatises on the Dharma, which set forth kind of the rules about the Hindu caste system and gender, how men and women were to be treated, different stages of life. It was like the rules of the game. That's what the Dharma was. And the kings in the various parts of India used the term to refer to their policies also. And then in the 18th century, I thought this was curious, when the British East India came, and were taking over India, basically, they wanted to instruct themselves in the finer points of the Hindu legal system. And so they consulted the Brahmin priest, the Hindu priest, and they began to study the Dharma Shastras, these legal things. And so the English translated the Dharma as the law. And sometimes now you even see in Buddhist things, the law of the Dharma. That was the thing that the British added. It's just sort of an interesting historical thing. And I think in some of the early Buddhist texts, it talks about turning the wheel of the Dharma or turning the wheel of the law. And you will see that sometimes. That's where that stuff came from. But that's just a little historical background. There are a couple of distinct meanings which I think are worth considering. And by the way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step you through the way this stuff came out of India and early Indian Buddhism, and then we're going to bridge it into China, into Chan and Zen, because it had different meanings. And I don't mean this to be a comparative religion class or just a historical class, but there's something in understanding where it came from and how it changed, which actually informs what we're doing. And I think it's useful. Is that okay? So if it gets boring, just raise your hand and say, please do something interesting. So first off, the most significant and common usage, as I've said, is Dharma is thought of as teachings or doctrines. That's the basis. And the Buddha even talked about this, about the teachings he received from his teachers. And after the Buddha's enlightenment, the first talk he gave, the first sermon, they call it sometimes. Some of us have a trigger on sermon. I look at CJ. Turning the wheel of Dharma. The first talk was turning the wheel of Dharma. And when the Buddha described what he was teaching to his students, his disciples, he called it the Dharma Vinaya. The Vinaya, depends on which way you use in Sanskrit or Pali, means the precepts, basically, the monastic rules. So it was the Dharma referred to everything else, and the Vinaya was the rules of monastic and order and the precepts. So this is what he taught. And so this root, DHRI, of holding, it doesn't just mean like what I'm doing, holding. It has a reference to holding one back, like not just containing, but like holding on, so he doesn't fall into bad places. It's like a tethering, so you don't fall into states of suffering. A form of protection, that kind of container that protects. I think of swaddling, you know. And the Buddha said that the gift of the Dharma was one of the greatest gifts, and it referred to this kind of meaning because it's protective. You know, we use the word appamada for part of our lineage, and that has also a protective quality, that mindful, diligent care isn't just a relational thing. It's because the mindfulness and care protects the mind from falling into unhealthy or unwholesome states. So this first and most common use of the word Dharma talks about the teachings that are heard or studied. That's often called the scriptural Dharma, and something that is made manifest by practitioners. And that's the realized Dharma. So it's something you take in and something you offer back. It's receptive and it's expressive. That's the main thing. There are teachings, those teachings you take in, and those teachings you manifest. And now, as we practice, some of the forms or ways we do that. A second and different connotation for Dharma is are like mental or physical factors, like constituent elements of phenomena. All dharmas are empty. You've heard people say something like that, or you'll hear in the it means the individual building blocks of compounded existence, of constructed existence, are the dharmas. Sometimes we will hear that all dharmas exist without a self. It means each one of those things isn't self, doesn't have an individual self. It's related to everything else. So dharmas has to do with their constructed phenomena, constituent elements of reality, and those are all the dharmas. And the Abhidharma, by the way, some of you seen that word before? The Abhidharma was the word used for, sometimes I think of it as like Buddhist psychology. It was the how the mind works. So there's the sutras, which are what the Buddhists apparently said. There's the Vinaya, which is how the monastic rules should go. And then there's the Abhidharma, which is like how all the stuff works. So Dharma fits in that. So teachings, and then all phenomena are also dharmas. And there's a third quality, which is a little interesting, I think, unique. I don't know if I understand it that well. It means the Dharma as a quality or a characteristic. In other words, there are ways in which you read some of the old texts, and it says there are dharmas of the Buddha, characteristics of the Buddha. So it's a little bit like the one I just mentioned, only specifically about qualities of the Buddha himself. And the primordial meaning is, this gets esoteric, so I'm not going to go into it much, the Dharmakaya, which is the truth body of the Buddha. There's the Nirmanakaya, which is the physical body of the Buddha, this one. The Sambhogakaya, which is the bliss body, the energetic body. And then the Dharmakaya is the, like the truth or wisdom body of the teachings. So you can see I'm sliding into the geeky parts here. You don't need to remember all these things. Really, I just wanted you to get a feel for some of the ways that you might find the word expressed. As I'm as I'm talking to you about these things, I have content that I want to share that hopefully will be useful to you. That's like the first definition of Dharma. The second thing is I have the characteristics of this group in this setting and who I am. You know, this is the setting in which this is the Dharma activity at play here. And then there are the qualities of, it said the Buddha, I'm the stand-in guy right now up here, which have to be taken into consideration, like jet lag. Really. I was thinking about it, and I was worried a little bit, like, is my mind going to be clear enough? It's coming up on 5:30 in the morning in my body, but I got up at midnight when I got up at 5 this morning. And it's just, I just arrived less than 24 hours ago. And so I'm not doing too bad at the moment, but, and I say this not as an apology, but as actually an immersion in the reality. This is the Dharma. This is the reality of the current Dharma, of those characteristics, while the larger Dharma plays itself out fully. As the teachings are still available completely. All of this is the Dharma. It's not, if I were better, then it would be that, no, however I stumble through, that is the Dharma of this moment. And so is yours. Whether you come here with energy and excitement, or you come not so sure about all this, you come crushed by grief, whatever you're bringing. That's part of the fabric of this Dharma that we're weaving the thread together with. And to be vulnerable and honest without shrinking or attempt just to overcome something to look good, that's also Dharmas. They're just not as wholesome. And the Soto tradition, Soto Zen, there's a statement, Nimitsu no Kafu. You don't need to know the Japanese. It means this tradition is called a careful and considerate style. That's what that means. A careful and considerate style. So we take care of each other, we're considerate and respectful of each other, and we use our bodies woven together in these forms to help us realize our interconnections. Now, as I reflected on how I would best talk about or teach or encourage you around this issue of Dharma, if I looked at the texts and the bodies of literature around this, I would feel like, talk about jet lag, I was just like falling asleep. It's because I'm just not that much of a scholar in these, you know, in that way. Just talk about, but I like, maybe I mentioned this before. I was reading something by a Jungian analyst one time, James Hillman, and he said the etymology of the word explain, it means to take something and lay it out flat, like a plane, like, you know, like a map, you know, lay something out, explain things. He said, I think we've done enough explaining. I think we need to get those ideas up instead of laying, we need to get them up and dance with them. You know, so that's what I hope to do. A little more dancing, like you were talking about. Although it may not seem that way to you at certain times. You know that long thing we chanted this morning, the merging of difference in unity? It was really fascinating for me to do because that's not the translation that I grew up on. And so I'm like I have to really look because I have it memorized, but I don't have that one memorized. And they change things, which is one of the ways to keep you on your Buddhist toes, you know. The title in Japanese of this particular poem by Sekito Kisen, who's one of our ancestors, is Sandokai. And so when I was training, we would chant in Japanese, which was like really hard because it's odd the way it's done. I may play I have a recording of it so you can hear it in Japanese at some point because it's kind of interesting to let something move through you. I think I did that once here when we did the other one. It's not quite as fancy as that, but so san do kai. San literally means three, but in this case it means things, you know, more than one thing, stuff. Do, san do means sameness, and kai means shake hands. To completely understand the relationship between the many things and sameness, san do kai. So all those things, the myriad things, all those individuals walking, and yet there's just one walking. The kai is putting those things together. So how do we understand the merging of difference and unity, which is the title, the merging of sameness and difference? Because all of us are individual, and yet we're this one body. We say there's no independently existing self, but I'm not you, you're not me. So what's the deal? How do we come to understand this? And that's what Sekito Kisen wrote in the Sandokai, and which we chanted this morning. And we'll be chanting it each day, so a couple more times. Let's look at it again. Pull it up in your. If you want to think about that, we have something that we're studying in the Dharma from a Zen perspective. This is your text for this time, and then we'll have more. I'm not going to be teaching you this once again in a classical, you know, teaching a text, but we are going to go through it and we're going to open it up and play with it and see how we can find the Dharma here. And so first, I'm going to just orient you a little more to it because you may not be. Anybody in here chant this most days or anything? No, it's unusual, isn't it? Okay, the mind of the great sage of India. Who's that? Huh? That's Buddha, yeah. So the mind of the great sage of India is intimately communicated from west to east. Oh, it's already, that mind is already communicated. While human faculties are sharp or dull, in other words, there's some people are on the ball and other people, not so much. But the way has no southern or northern ancestors. That's a reference to China when there was a big discussion between the Democrats and Republicans. No, between the northern people and the southern people about what the true Dharma was. So he's saying, Sekito Kisen is saying, this is a universal teaching. It's intimately communicated everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're smart or not so smart. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's north or south, which perspective. It's the same Dharma. In fact, the spiritual source shines clear in the light and branching streams flow on in the dark. Now, here's something you may not realize. In Chinese thought, the dark, okay, we talk about enlightenment, like you turn on the light and then you can see everything, like that's how you wake up. The absolute in China is the dark, because in the dark, there's no distinctions. You don't make any distinction. Everything's the same. The light is the relative. The dark is the absolute. So the spiritual source shines here in the everyday, and branching streams flow deep in the absolute all the time, down in the dark. Grasping at things is delusion, but being one with everything is still not alignment. We'll go further later. I'm just orienting you. All the objects of the senses interact and yet do not. Interacting brings involvement. Otherwise, each keeps its place. So it's talking about sameness and duality. Sights vary in quality and form. Sounds different and pleasant or harsh. Refined and common speech come together in the dark. See, in the absolute, it's all the same. Clear and murky phrases are distinguished in the light, but you do need discernment. The four elements return to their natures just as a child turns to its mother. Now, the four elements are, this comes from ancient, the fire elements and the wind, they show up as these different things, but they come from the same source and they return to the same source, just like a child does to its mother. In other words, fire heats, wind moves, water wets, earth is solid, eye and form, ear and sound. Oh, see, I'm using my old translation. Nose and smells, tongues and taste. He's describing all these things. Thus, with each and everything, depending on these roots, the leaves spread forth. We use our senses and our bodies to perceive the world, and we're created by that world. But then we start creating the world. Therefore, the leaves spread forth. We start creating what's happening. But the trunk and the branches share the same essence. Whether it's revered or it's common, each has its way of speaking. Then there's this interesting, in the light, right here, in this room, at Carondelet, are we in Minneapolis or St. Paul? St. Paul, and wherever you are online, right here, there is the absolute. It's darkness. But don't take it as darkness. Just don't get all high and mighty and think it's all spiritual here in the Catholic Center, In the dark, there's light. In the absolute, everything's happening. But don't get caught up in all the happenings. Don't see it as light. Light and darkness oppose one another like front and back foot in walking. Oh, kinhin. So you step first with your left foot. So which is the back foot? The right one. But then you take another step, and now what's the back foot? The left one. Wait a minute. So which is it when you're walking? Light and dark oppose one another like front and back foot in walking. They both are required to walk. Each of the myriad things has its merit, see? Expressed according to its function and place. Phenomena do exist. Box and lid fit together, principle accords, arrow points meet. That arrow points meeting, that refers to an old Chinese tale, where these two famed archers are at the end of opposite ends of a field, and they shoot their arrows and their arrow points meet. In other words, it's this vast, inconceivable skill. But things do meet. So he starts out with box and lid fit. That's pretty common, right? Principles accord. That's a little more esoteric. Arrow points meet. That's like crazy. So he's going from the most common to the most. Hearing the words, understand the meaning. Don't set up standards on your own. So now he's jumping in here as a teacher. So listen to the Dharma, practice the Dharma, but don't start making stuff up. Because if you don't understand the way right before you, how are you going to know how to walk? How are you going to know how to proceed in your life? Just like in walking meditation, progress is not a matter of far or near. It's not that we're trying to get somewhere so much. But if you're confused, mountains and rivers, everything in the world is going to get in your way. You're going to be thrown off by everything. I respectfully urge you to study the mystery. Do not pass your days and nights in vain. There's another translation. The last line says, don't waste time, which I kind of like. Don't pass your days and nights in vain. It's a little soft, Like, don't waste time. So we're studying the mystery. And the mystery has to do with this absolute and relative thing and how they both exist. It's basically the way that the old teachers understood jet lag, complexity theory. Because you can see in this, he's talking about light, right? Wave and particle, which is it? Shows up as a wave, shows up as a particle. And yet you can't say it's either one, but it's also not the combination of both. It's the same thing. They were intuiting this. Do you see that in there? That's how life is. That's how consciousness is, actually. So how are we doing so far? You're doing okay? I just wanted to walk through it. So now when we chant it, different things will pop up. And what I'm going to do is Suzuki Roshi back in the late 60s gave a whole long series of lectures on the Sandakai. And there's a book you can get, which is edited by Sojun Mel Weitzman, called Branching Streams Flow in the Dark. And it's all the Suzuki Roshi lectures have been edited so you can read them pretty nicely. And it's a beautiful treatise if you're the kind of person who likes to study those things. When I was in Japan in 1997, I think it was, I was in a practice period, and the leaders of that practice period were Huitsu Suzuki, Suzuki Roshi's son, and we were at Rinsu-in, Suzuki Roshi's original temple, before he came to the United States. So Huitsu, Mel Weitzman, and Blanche Hartman were his teachers. So my teacher was Blanche. She had Dharma transmission from Huitsu. He had Dharma transmission from, so it was the whole lineage that was alive. So I couldn't miss that trip. So I want to go. And we went to Eheiji and Sojiji, the two temples. In Soto Zen, there's two Vaticans. And they literally alternate every year. Who's the head one? And we got to go to those because Blanche was doing some ceremonies. In 1997, Mel was editing these talks. And so my job some days would be to go to this little tea house and get the manuscripts he had done and take them to FedEx back to the United States. I mean, it was really interesting, this book that was being put together at that time. It was in 1969, it started in 1970 during the summer were the main talks that Suzuki Roshi gave. And this was being done at Tassajara, so the monastery in California. So the students were already attending services and zazen and preparing meals and working and doing the things one does in a monastery. And during the day, I'm just going to read a little bit what Mel wrote when he's reflecting on this. He said, during the day, Suzuki Roshi, small and seemingly frail, so he was barely 5 feet tall and he had cancer at this time, was busy putting large stones in place on the side of the creek to prevent erosion. At night, he lectured. Those of us who were fortunate enough to work with him were always amazed at his energy and ability, even when he was old and not well. He worked all day in the 100-degree plus heat. His tremendous spirit was communicated through his work. His tremendous spirit. We might spend all day putting a large stone in place, and if it wasn't right, he would take it out and start all over the next day. I told you the story about that, right? When all the young guys, because he had all the young guys at the monastery, helping him, and he was like kicking their ass. And so at one break, they said, "What's the deal? you're old and you're sick and you're doing fine and we're like dying out here. And he said, I rest in every moment.
Mm.
Mel continues. At that time, I was Suzuki Roshi's personal attendant. At the beginning of our formal daily practice of zazen and service, I would follow him into the zendo with an incense offering. In the heat of the day, I would sometimes place a water-soaked washcloth on top of his shaved head to cool him off. That's why I did that in the spa yesterday. His wife, Mitsu-san, came down from San Francisco in that summer of 1970 because she was very worried about him. She knew he was very ill and thought he was working too hard. Sometimes when she would pass by, he would pretend that he was resting and then go back to moving the stones. She once chastised him, I mean, in front of everybody, using the familiar name for an abbot, Hojo-san, Hojo-san, you're cutting your life short. And he said, if I don't cut my life short, my students will not grow. I'm no Suzuki Roshi, but I did think about that as I got on the plane. There are 4 elements of the Dharma that show up in the Sandokai in this. The eternal Dharma, Dharma as phenomena. I'll repeat this over and over. Dharma as path and Dharma as teachings. The eternal Dharma, Dharma as phenomena, path, and teaching. In other words, the eternal Dharma, that's our aspiration to be awake, to, when we do the refuges and we say, I take refuge in Dharma, before all being entering deeply the merciful ocean of Buddha's way, there's that, our aspiration to understand the eternal Dharma. The Dharma as phenomena, I'm going to go more into these, but that means like day-to-day practice activity. Dharma manifesting as what we're doing and the instructions we're giving you and the things we're doing. There's the Dharma as a path. That's when our aspirations unfolds in steady practice. It provides a way that we're living our lives. And then the last Dharma is teachings. That's the study. That's the Dharma, like the Buddha gave us, the one I mentioned in the beginning. So doing okay so far? Okay.
Mhm.
You're not too bored. No, Nan never gets bored. The eternal Dharma, I'm going to go back through them and I'm going to say a few things about it. And then I'm also going to weave in things Suzuki Roshi said in his lectures. So I'm going to be playing with Suzuki Roshi and with you all together. Is that okay?
Mhm.
Okay. So in the early texts in Buddhism, and the Theravadan texts, from Southeast Asia, from India, Shakyamuni Buddha would say that the Dharma is always present, whether or not there's a Buddha to teach it or a Sangha to practice it. So this is the eternal Dharma. This is the first one, the 4 I gave you. It's always there. And in this sense, what he's saying is Dharma is this sense of the underlying substrate of reality of our lives and our world. It's the ultimate and primordial fact of who and what we are. It's the ground of being. And in such a realization, if you touch this, and I was trying to point to this in Zazen this morning a little bit by talking about this play of consciousness with the mirror, we see that this unbound fullness is who and what we actually are, that has no beginning and has no end, although our bodies do, but not this quality of Dharma. And it expresses itself as a universal and all-encompassing love. So this is like the big Dharma. In his lectures, Suzuki Roshi said, this mind, the one I just described, and you remember the first line of the poem, the great sage of India is intimately communicated the mind. Although the teaching of the great sage may not be completely understood, still it reaches everywhere. No, Suzuki Roshi. It reaches everywhere. Even though you don't understand it. You don't have to understand it. It understands you. It reaches everywhere. And this eternal Dharma is accessible to every one of us. It's not inaccessible. In fact, it's always like hovering at the periphery of our consciousness all the time. Whether we're Buddhists, not just Buddhists, but even Buddhists or not, it doesn't matter. Or whether or not we have any interest in spirituality. That reality is always there. I'm just talking about it from a Buddhist perspective. But you could, a Catholic mystic would talk about it. I'm talking about the Kabbalah. They talk about this mystery that's always there. Here's what Suzuki Roshi said. He said, so our understanding is that there is one whole being that includes everything. And that the many things are found in this one whole being. So many and one are not different ways of describing whole being, he would say. So you get the idea of the eternal Dharma we're talking about? Like the big, vast mystery fullness of everything. Number 2, Dharma as phenomena, day-to-day practice. The Dharma is the basis of our ordinary existence, of our thoughts and perceptions and everything that happens that makes up everything. This is the Dharma. So in this way, tell your story about your kid.
On the way to retreat this morning, Flint was asking about my teaching with Peace in Schools in Portland. I'm teaching this mindfulness course called Mindful Studies, taking care of yourself, taking care of each other, taking care of the world.
Oh, you need this mic?
You need to see. Oh my goodness. And at one school, I teach it to an incoming new cohort of students every 6 weeks. And there was a student who on the final day of class, as we were leaving, and instead of bowing, we do fist bumps. Fist bumps. Okay.
These are teenagers.
These are teenagers, high school students. And he said, they call me CJ. CJ, I want to tell you that this class I wasn't so into at first, but I stuck with it. And I feel like as a class, we all got connected, and I feel connected to you. I didn't expect to hear this from this particular young man at all. And he said, and I feel more connected to myself sometime. And he said, the main thing is, I feel like after this, I'm more able to just live life as it is.
And then you fell over.
I know I don't use that language. I had never said that in class with him, but here it is coming back from this young teenage student. Yeah.
Oh. It's always here. And sometimes we notice.
Yeah.
And sometimes it gets reflected back to us in the places we don't expect it, but it's always around us. So it is what is so in our lives, whether we like it or not, whether it's what we wish for or not, whether it's what we expect or not. Each moment, life as it is, which this young man, by entering into some practices, came to that understanding himself. Sometimes it's sudden illness, a breakdown of a relationship. We know this. Sometimes it's an unexpected death. We're all way too close to that right now. All of them are expression of like the Dharma breaking through our own personal sense of the world. Like it shatters us somehow and we're brought up short. But it's also the light that, like at our house in Molokai, because we're sort of semi-third world, you know, you hope the internet works or if the light will come on. If the cell phone's going to work. But it's also the total surprise of a newborn child or something happening that you didn't expect, a student coming to you and teaching you the Dharma when you didn't even realize it. The sudden shock of seeing someone else in a totally different way you didn't ever expect to see them because you have an idea of them. That's the Dharma. That's what we mean by this Dharma as phenomena. Suzuki Roshi said, and commenting on that line, is intimately transmitted from the Sandokai. Remember, it's intimate, this great sage, the mind is intimately transmitted. The word in Japanese is mitsuni, which you don't need to know. He was going character by character, by the way. He said it literally means exactly without a gap between the two. He said the main purpose of the Sandokai is to explain reality from two sides. San means many, do means one. Even though they are one, they may appear to be many. So these kind of events that break through and kind of shock us into reality, they show us where we're caught. That's like the image I've talked about of a long retreat being like putting a snake in a bamboo tube. It's like every place it tries to wiggle, it reaches an edge. You know, there's no place to go because you're. So we revealed to us how we're caught in our self-centered dream. And so we get waked up, and sometimes it's not pleasant. Sometimes it is revelatory in a very generous way. And all that occurs within the light of Dharma. Because when the unreality of our fixed notions of the world are demonstrated to us, we see then Dharma. We don't just, in other words, we're not just looking in the mirror and seeing the reflections. Something larger. And as we do, then all the little particular things we're dealing with and the struggles we have, the good things, the bad things, we call them, we say, oh, that's that eternal Dharma, the first one, manifesting. That's how we know the eternal Dharma is in the particular. That's how we realize it. It's like, oh, it looks like this, you know, and it looks like this, and it feels like this. This is the eternal Dharma showing up as form and emptiness. So the sort of nakedness and starkness of phenomena that break through remind us of the eternal Dharma is always here. Really close, all the time. Here's one more from Suzuki Roshi in his lecture. The mind of the great sages of India, he said, is Buddha's big mind that includes everything. The mind we have when we practice is the great mind. We don't try to see anything. We stop conceptual thinking. We stop emotional activity. We just sit. I mean, those are a little too declarative, but you know what he's referring to. We're not trying to see anything. We're just not getting caught up in thinking, not getting caught up. We just sit. Whatever happens to us, we're not bothered. We just sit. It's like something happening in the great sky. Whatever kind of bird flies through it, the sky doesn't care. That is the mind transmitted from Buddha to us. The mind that I was talking about in Zazen this morning. I'd forgotten that that was there. Came up in my mind. So that great consciousness, that great mind of India is what's transmitted to us. I'm orienting myself.
That's okay.
Ah,
That's good.
10 to 11. Okay. So we're coming up on the end of when our Dharma talk would end. Would it be okay if I continue a little bit longer?
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
finish these 4?
Yes, yes, yes.
You can manage? So we've done universal Dharma, Dharma as phenomena. And now the third one was Dharma as what? Path. You had it written down. That's good. Dharma's path. Okay. So how we respond to disruptions and destabilizations that we experience in eternal Dharma shows up in the experiences of our lives, and then we have choice. For example, have you ever fallen into avoidance or denial? If you haven't, then you can leave. You're fine. Have you ever felt shaky and way too vulnerable, so you tried to like pull yourself together and reconstitute a solid, comfortable, secure self? You know, we know these things, right? So the Dharma are these signals that come through that suddenly turn us on the path. The first approach, you know, denial or pushing things away and pretending things are otherwise, results in further bondage. Those are things we do. It keeps us bound up, right? Because we're just continuing our conditioning. It increases our confusion and our suffering. That's holding to self-centered thoughts, you know, in our chant. And continues the sort of negative karma, if you want to call it. But when we allow the dharmas to wake us up, then we are freed of unnecessary suffering. And we experience the gradual dissolving of the one who suffers. Think about this. It's not that the bad stuff stops, to put it bluntly. What begins to dissolve is the one who suffers. This is way too facile to say it this way, but those of you that are therapists, which I know there are a lot of them here, and those of you who know IFS, it's like the gradual unburdening of all parts, the gradual disidentification with. parts and resting back into self-energy. And it's a little simplistic to say that, but that's, you get a feel for it though. And in the beginning, for most of us, I'll speak for myself anyway, the path is painful and difficult. It's like, wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be the end of suffering. And now you're asking me to do these things that are really, really hard. On that same trip in Japan, I already told you the story probably about going to see Blanche in practice discussion, Dokusan, and asking her about this. I'll tell you that. I went to see her for Dokusan one morning. Early in the morning, it was raining. I remember coming down off the eaves. I go to the little tea house where she's waiting for me for practice discussion. We sit knee to knee. And I said, if this practice is about the end of suffering, why do we do all this stuff that hurts so much? Not to put too fine a point on it. And she looked down and she laughed and she looked right at me and she said, because we're practicing to know how to respond to the suffering that doesn't stop when the bell rings.
Oh, wow.
So even if I've told you, it's worth telling again. It's like, oh yeah. In the beginning, the path can be difficult and painful. But we bring ourselves back again and again and again to the uncomfortable edge of what the Dharma is showing us, to the ambiguity and the fear and the groundlessness of the present moment, which won't go away. Our practice will not make that go away. And over time, we return and suddenly find ourselves at ease with some relief, with the path of the Dharma, Dharma's path, suddenly opening up, unrolling naturally and widely and effortlessly beneath our feet. It's like, oh, there's a different way to live. We're living with the same stuff, same body, same other people not acting right, same aging, same politics, same everything. But the path looks different. Here in that part of the teaching, here's what Suzuki Roshi said in his reflections on the Sandakai. When you feel that you are somebody, you have to practice Zazen harder. As you know, it is difficult to sit without thinking or feeling. And once again, he's using concepts that as contemporary, especially psychologically oriented people, we might think, what do you mean not thinking or feeling? Of course you're going to think and feel. But you have to understand as an older Japanese teacher what he's trying to communicate, okay? As you know, it is difficult to sit without thinking or feeling. I would say it's difficult to sit without over-involvement with our thinking and feeling. When you don't think or feel, you usually fall asleep, he said. Right? Because, we stop once and for all. Finally, we stop and your body's like, oh, it must be time for sleep because we're stopped. It doesn't understand this thing about stopping as fullness in the moment. When you don't think or feel, you usually fall asleep. But without sleeping and without thinking, just to be yourself is our practice. When you can do that, you will be able to speak without thinking too much and without having any special purpose. When you speak or act, it will be just to express yourself. This is complete self-respect. It's very unusual language, I know. I'm going to read it again. When you feel that you're somebody, you have to practice Zazen harder. As you know, it is difficult to sit without thinking or feeling. when you don't think or feel, you usually fall asleep. Well, without sleeping and without thinking, just to be yourself is our practice. When you can do that, you will be able to speak without thinking too much and without having any special purpose. When you speak or act, it will be just to express yourself. This is complete self-respect. That's not the kind of way we think, is it? I'm going to say it in another way. I'm going to walk back through it, but I'm going to make it up as I go. Okay, here we go. So I'm talking to myself. When you feel that you're really somebody, you're going to have to practice a little harder. Because as you know, and you've discovered, it's really difficult to sit without getting really caught up in thinking and feeling. All self-concern. But when you don't get too caught up in your thinking, even as it's going on, or too lost in your feelings, even though they're moving, you usually just fall asleep because you don't think anything's happening. But without falling asleep and without leaning into all this activity that's self-concern, you can just be yourself. What is that? You can just be yourself. That's our practice, just to be yourself. And when you can do that, when you can rest back into the self, then you'll be able to come forward and speak and act without all of this dialogue and self-concern. You can be more immediate without having any special purpose, without having to maintain yourself as you speak in the world. When you speak or act in that way, you really are expressing, I really am expressing myself, but not the personality. I'm expressing something deeper, out of which I feel a profound self-respect rather than self-image. Or self-importance, or even self-esteem. It's a different thing. Is this making any sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it's moving in me. I'm doing that. So I'm narrating the path as it's opening in me, which which you also get a glimpse of the phenomena of Dharma, which begins to open and touch the eternal Dharma. Those three we've just talked about. Does that make sense? I'm going back and forth. So the last one is the Dharma as teachings. This is the most concrete one that we think of as Dharma. The teachings that are delivered by the Buddha and then added to by countless other teachers and, women and men over the centuries who've added. So it's like this big library of Dharma. So this Dharma describes and points to and tries to evoke the eternal Dharma. It's trying to describe the thing that's indescribable, trying to point to the thing without getting lost in the pointing. It's trying to evoke the realization of the eternal Dharma as it appears right here in our life. If we don't get lost in the adornments, what do you call it when you get dressed and you add accessories? We accessorize ourselves with all of the stuff. But if it's uninterpreted and unaccessorized, what's just our life? The eternal Dharma that shows up. like I know you've heard me say this before, but this is a good place to remind the great Dharma teachings of Coco Chanel. Since I'm talking about that, remember that one? What is it?
Whatever you put on last, take it off.
This is the Dharma statement. Elegance is refusal. Isn't that great? Elegance is refusal. But it's kind of pointing to the same thing, isn't it? Now, in the most essential sense, maybe you know this historically, the actual sutras of the Buddhist teachings, they were supposedly memorized by Ananda, his cousin, and then later written down, but it was all oral in the beginning. There weren't any written sutras. And apparently Ananda was able to remember the. So when you hear the ancient sutras, they're very repetitive because they had to be memorized, and they all start with the same thing. Every one of them starts with, "Thus have I heard." Because Ananda had just, "Thus have I heard." The Buddha said at wherever, that they all start that way. So think of a world-class pianist, for example. You couldn't become a world-class pianist by reading the music on the page. You could, if you can read music, that's cool. But that doesn't make you a classical pianist, does it? Or you can get the best cookbooks and read them, but does that make you a good cook? So if you read every book on Amazon on the Dharma, that doesn't actually mean you're practicing deeply. To learn the Dharma, you have to hear it. And the nuances and subtleties and the embodied experience, the things that I don't know that I'm going to say, that I do say, the stories we call on, the things that come to me during Zazen that I want to mention, this is where it starts to come to life. Even though you could read my notes or you could read the book, and you do, and it's good, but you have to, in the chant before, the classic one that I learned was, "An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words." It's primitive taste. So this is why we have to engage in Dharma activities like inquiry and why we have these retreats. Otherwise, you could just read the books. And it's said that in speaking, the Buddha tailored his discourses to the specific people he was talking to. Well, hello, that's the task. Otherwise, I could write out a nice lecture on each thing, and I could record it and I could send it to you. I'm like, that'd be it, right? Why is that not the same? No, really, I'm asking a real question. Why is that not the same as what we're doing right now? It'd be the same information, but what's missing?
Community.
Part of it's community, part of it's what? Yeah, it's alive. And there's something about hearing it that does something for me. It's not just going this way. I'm practicing. And you're listening, and I see something on your faces. I see you shaking your head sometimes, or I see a frown on your face, or I see you start to go to sleep, or there's various things that I'm trying to find a way to make sure this gets communicated, because to me, it's the most important thing.
Mhm.
And we get to see that that's the most important thing.
But say again,
We get to see that that's the most important.
you get to see that that's the most important thing.
Mm.
So it becomes alive in that way. Are you having trouble? Do we need to slow down? No? Okay. So this is the eternal Dharma expressed as phenomena, opening as a path based on the teachings, all those qualities. And it's not unusual for, you know, when a teacher is teaching to hear, like I do all the time, I lapse into stories and things, because that's how, when I say early in the morning, I went to see Blanche in a temple in Japan and it was raining and I could see, suddenly you can feel the chill, you can hear the sound, you know, that's what does it. And I'm not doing that for effect. I'm doing it because that's how it starts to become alive. I'm going to read a little bit more from Mel Weitzman. Because these talks that he was editing in this book were spoken and they were recorded. So Mel said, because these talks were sequential, editing them was more difficult than was the case for a Zen mind, beginner's mind. Most of you have read Zen mind, beginner's mind, right? All those talks were done at different times and then put together in a certain way to form a body of, but these were sequential. He said the voice in the Sandokai talks doesn't always sound like the voice in Zen mind, beginner's mind. Partly because Suzuki Roshi is speaking about a text here, like I'm doing, and the merging of difference in unity, but also because of the editor's approach in presenting his voice. Originally, we wanted to keep the text as close as possible to the original. But as we continued to go over the talks, it became clear that a verbatim account sometimes had to give way to some consistency. And Suzuki Roshi occasionally revisited the same topics during the series of talks, but not always with the same approach. You see me do this all the time. So often the editors would have to choose between the different ways the same phrases were stated on different occasions. Sometimes we would have to bridge the gaps in statements that were indistinct or not clearly expressed. And rather often we'd have to choose whether or not to leave intact a statement that was characteristic of Suzuki Roshi's way of speaking, or to change it for the sake of written clarity and consistency. So is this history interesting? See, he said sometimes Suzuki Roshi would make up phrases of his own in order to express himself in a more non-dualistic way. For example, he often used the phrase, things as it is. Things as it is, to mean the fundamental nature of reality, just something beyond words. But he also used things as they are to refer to discriminating dualistic thinking and perceiving. So he was aware of the difference. Things as it is, he used the singular and plural in the same phrase, stretches our ordinary way of thinking. He made up the word interdependency. No, independency. He made up the word independency, which he uses to express the dependent and at the same time independent nature of our lives. When I asked him about it once, I said that English has the words independent, dependent, and interdependent. So Mel was trying to teach him, you know. But I'd never heard the words independency. He laughed at me and said that he had made it up. He explained that we are completely independent and at the same time completely dependent. If you think you are just independent, that is wrong. If you think you are just dependent, that is not right either. Interdependent might seem like the correct word here, but Suzuki Roshi used independency to express that ambivalent quality. He said, that's the secret of Soto Zen. which is yes, but. Other places, when he was asked, actually, this is the beginning story in Crooked Cucumber, his biography. And David Chadwick, who wrote the biography, is a very interesting guy. He's from Fort Worth, Texas, and very rough, but totally committed and totally a disciple of Suzuki Roshi. And so one night at Tassajara, at the end of a lecture, it was one of those times where he thought he would ask a question that he didn't expect the teacher to answer, but he thought he would ask it anyway. He said to his teacher, he said, I love listening to you. I could sit here and listen all night long. I have no idea what you're saying. I don't understand it. Could you please just summarize Zen, like in one phrase? Knowing he would never do that. But in the story and writing it, David said, that night he did. He said, not always so. Next question.
Oh.
Yes, but not always so. So for most of us, of course, the written word is the initial gate. How many of you, read your Buddhist books and you read Tricycle and Buddha Dharma, and we do this because it's lovely. And then hopefully reading the books will open the door for the next encounter with the teacher. And then you can begin to hear the Dharma in an oral form. And if you do that over time and you meet some other folks, that can lead you on the path of engaging with meditation and engaging with practice together. And when you do that, it begins to open up, lay bare the kind of tough quality of our everyday lives. And as we make a fuller and fuller acquaintance with the actuality of our lives, not the story of our lives, not the narrative, we begin to sense this background awareness that I was speaking about this morning. You're not just looking at what's reflected in the mirror. You start feeling yourself as the mirror. This awareness that runs through all experience, a thread that runs through all experience. And our sense of this awareness, our own Buddha nature, this background consciousness, deepens. It's already deep. We realize it. And more than anything else, that we realize this is fundamentally who and what we are, what we've always been. All the time we were just reading one book after another, going to retreats. There's no gap after a while between the eternal Dharma and this Dharma that we're experiencing as the path. And this is what's encompassed in this one word, the eternal, all phenomena, the path that we're walking. And the teachings that come out of that, which then flow back to us, that we read and realize and practice with. And we become less and less enchanted by the thing that we're trying desperately to hold on to, which is the life that is full of suffering that we seem to prefer. And with difficulty begin to open to the fact that that is a gateway to another kind of life, which is full of dignity and respect and possibility in the midst of all of that stuff, which is not going to stop. And that's part of the dignity in it. We've stopped fighting it and thinking we are entitled to or deserve a life that is somehow different than this one. This is amazing. This is remarkable. This is a magical gift. And it's really rough. And we really need each other to do it. And it's all of that. And the one thing, the merging of difference and unity. is where we meet the Dharma. So that's enough for today. And what would normally come at this time, I think, is Zazen, but we've been sitting for a long time. So we have a choice. We can do Kinhin now and come back and see if there are any questions before lunch, which might be a good idea. How would that be? Get up and walk. And then the things that you have questions about, discernments about, complaints about.
Choice.
Yeah. And online too, if you have things that you want, raise your hand and we'll make sure we get you. Yes.
You had mentioned that most people come to the Dharma by reading books and finding a teacher, finding a path of practice. And I feel like for me here, I found a practice first and then found a teacher and began to start reading into the teachings. And so I feel like it's kind of a question, but my path forward, because my practice has been so rich and great, I still have a wild mind that wants the training that these teachings offer and the teacher and community offers. So the precepts, the Eightfold Path, just kind of stay with it. There's no golden book to read or thing to do to get this, those teachings into this wild mind.
That's what the next 2 days are about.
Oh,
Also.
Oh.
In a way, because what you're asking is how's the Dharma transmitted? Because however you come, I was just giving kind of a general sense of it. However we come, if you're here and your aspiration is such that you're drawn to do these retreats, you're drawn to follow some teaching or a teacher and support each other. If you want to wet your intention is for us to flower, to deepen. That's what I hear. And this is a way, and there are forms which call to you. So you're saying more, more. But we meet an interesting dilemma, which is the inconceivable can't be put into words and taught, and yet we do it, and that's what the next couple of days is going to be about. And so that's also why we use the forms to give a container, the holding that the Dharma provides for that. Mostly, aside from any of the content that you just said, what I hear from you is that you have a lot of what we call bodhicitta, this desire to practice and to practice for the service of others and for your own life. Yeah. It happens every once in a while. You start doing this stuff and you think it's like, you know, like for a while I was a therapist with like a bad Zen habit on the side. It did this thing, and then after a while I realized it had changed. That it was like the only game in town. And I expressed myself as a therapist.
Our walk just now was a parable of your presentation. In that, as we started out, and you would know because you were walking behind me, I kept tipping over because I was thinking of half steps and use your whole foot and keep it going. And every time I did that, I'd tip over.
You lost your balance, yeah.
I lose my balance, and because I'm a dancer, that was pretty horrifying that I kept tipping over. And then I thought of what you said about when you look in the mirror, a lot of times we just look at the particulars. And then I thought about the deep underneath that the particulars and personality come out of. And once I thought of the deep, then I started not tipping over. And then I also thought of the deep. Yeah, the deep is there, but I'm a human being walking on the earth, and I have learned how to walk. So I probably could try just walking like I usually do. Myself.
Yes.
And it worked, and the deep was just the most beautiful sense. I got an image of the ocean that's under the physical ocean that just makes the physical ocean on our earth look like this. And then there's this deep, and just how that went into action.
Yeah.
It turned out Mike, who says he's not a dancer, was doing it right. I mean, it looked right. Whereas my body was just flinging all over the place.
And that's what was required for you to actually come to terms with meeting the universal with your particular.
Yeah,
And that was your Dharma path.
yeah,
Wonderful.
it was great.
Yeah.
It was just full.
You feel the universal rise up and meet you. It's not that you're having to step on it.
Right. It emerged, it bubbled
Yeah.
up. Because it saw what was happening to me.
And it's always there, ready. to hold you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just wonderful.
I noticed a difference and I didn't know what happened. So thanks for letting me know.
Oh.
This is more of a comment, but I just really appreciated the sense of teachings coming alive through speaking them. And it reminded me of the precepts study group and just how critical it was to hear everybody's experience and sharing as an expression, because, you know, I would read the materials and think about it and observe myself and get really frustrated at times, you know, just because it just, you know, right there all the time. And but it's like it could drop down into a heart place when we were all together and sharing our experience. And in some ways it was all the same experience, but just everybody's particulars. But then also, you know, just on Wednesdays when, you know, we're studying Blanche's book right now, we read it by ourselves first, and then somebody reads the text. And it's like I have no connection inside whatsoever when I read it myself. But as soon as somebody else is reading it and reciting it without explaining it, it's alive. And so this was really meaningful to me.
It's amazing how for example, during the pandemic, we have this capacity to meet, you know, when we couldn't meet in person, but we couldn't wanted to hear each other and see each other and feel each other and express the Dharma in some way, even we couldn't be physically in person. And so even now, when we're at a distance, we still engage it because it's really important. We have the benefit of being in person. That's great too. It's not, you know, like better or worse particularly, there's a different quality to it. But because we need that resonance of, that's one of the reasons why I gave you that handout with all the koans on them, because this is the Dharma activity that was the innovation in China with the realization that it needed to be enacted. No, so we're gonna enjoy some of that, I think. Enjoy maybe a generous word.
Will there be a test?
What's that?
Will there be a test?
No, there's no test. You already passed the test. You were born. You exist. Anything else right now? Oh, yes.
I found myself wondering when you were speaking of the phenomena and how this shows up in our life in particulars and shows up where we're caught. And it's like that is kind of where the Dharma gates are presented.
I think that sounds quite nice.
Okay.
What is it? What is a Dharma gate in your understanding?
Like an opportunity to enter the Dharma, to engage, I guess, as a path too.
Yeah.
So it's to make a choice. So it's kind of in between those.
Yeah, you're saying it really nicely. Yeah, I'm just reflecting it back. That's exactly. Dharma gates are boundless that we chant because it's what's happening all the time. That every single moment is an opportunity to enter the Dharma. So we make a vow to step into that and you don't have to think about it. It's not literally me separate doing this thing. Your life is it. But we can wake up to that fact and appreciate it, no matter what that life looks like at the moment. I think we're going to engage the Dharma gate of lunch. Any announcements or anything we need?
Like 1:30.
Start.